services, as long as we were providing the Chevy, we felt like was good enough. And so that was actually terminology that was used many years ago. But this particular case, the ruling came out that the IEP should be reasonably calculated to enable a child to make progress that is appropriate in light of his or her unique circumstances. Hang on, it takes a minute for me to be able to advance the screen. There we go. So actually, the Chief Justice in that particular case was quoted as saying, when all is said and done, a student offered an educational program providing merely more than de minimis progress from year to year can hardly be said to have been offered an education at all. So if we had just set the standard as just the very minimum, this particular judge ruled that that's actually saying we're not providing anything, that the student is not really being offered an education at all. So with that, now we're looking at, are we designing our IEPs to be appropriately ambitious? And so another quote from that case is, for children with disabilities receiving instruction that aims so low would be tantamount to sitting idly, awaiting the time when they were old enough to drop out. Rather than providing the bare minimum of educational benefits, the IEP must be appropriately ambitious. So with all that in mind, as we're designing IEPs now, and I will say, and Carla is exactly right, we're not doing this training and having you design IEPs to meet some kind of compliance issue. That's something KDE is going to look at. But KDE is only going to look at what is necessary to design an IEP appropriately. And this year, when they're looking at their monitoring focus, they're going to be looking at, are IEPs designed that are appropriately ambitious? And looking at this process we're going to discuss today is going to give you the tools to actually know how to do that. And so on page 7 of your guidance document, there is a graphic that is showing you the IEP process. And you'll see the circles at the bottom going, or the arrows, they're going round and round. This process continues. It's once we get one cycle completed, then we're designing the next cycle. So it's an ongoing process. So if you'll look at that graphic, and we're going to actually start with the present level section, which is the section you need to begin with. And we're going to spend a lot of time on that because to me, it's the most important section when designing your IEP. We have a tendency to want to straight to the goals and setting your measurable annual goals. This is what I want to do with a kid. That's not where you need to start. So we're going to start with the present levels. And in the present levels, we need to have some student performance data. And that is any information that demonstrate how the student is performing academically, behaviorally, socially, and functionally. We need to know this. The data assists the ARC in the decision-making and the development of the IEP for each student. We've got to have some information knowing exactly where this student is and the starting point to design the IEP. And that is why it's so important to begin with the present level section. How is the student presently performing with skills in academics, behavioral skills, social skills, and functional skills? So some examples of data that you can collect for this, we're going to look for academic and non-academic areas. We can look at classroom data, results of interventions, any type of assessment data. If it's an annual review, we're going to look at previous progress monitoring data and any kind of additional data that's going to share with us how the student is performing. But a key point, and this is on either page 8 or 9 in your IEP guidance document, is do not recycle or reuse previous IEP data performance data. It must be obtained within the annual IEP cycle. So when we talk about annual with the special ed world, we're talking about within a year. And this is really difficult when you're looking at those students with the cognitive range in the mild mental disability and the functional mental disability range. And I know when you're filling out your general intelligence section, many times you just want to rely on an IQ score. Well, if that IQ score was obtained 2 years ago, That's not current information. That's not within that current cycle. So we're going to have some kind of data that's going to tell us about that student's general intellectual. And that doesn't necessarily mean another IQ test. We're going to talk about some things you can look at in a minute, but understand you cannot use data that's more than a year old in that IEP cycle. Again, should not be recycled, and it must be obtained during the annual IEP cycle. Whoops. Sorry. And you'll find out today that the Zoom link has craziness between when Carla and I share screen. Sometimes just clicking on the other end will advance the slide, so bear with us. All right, so let's start with the present levels. And again, I love this quote. Without a solid foundation, you'll have trouble creating anything of value. Guys, I want you to think of your present level as the foundation for everything else that's going to be designed in the IEP. And with that being said, that's one of the things whenever we're looking at IEPs, anything we have in other sections of the IEP, we need to be able to go back in the present level and make a connection of how we got that information. So how did we come up with this measurable annual goal? Where's my starting point that's noted in the present level section? When I get to the special considerations factors, some information there, I need to go back and link it. Where did I know about that from the present level section? Everything has to link back to this section. So you're going to spend a lot of time working on present levels. So the present level is a summary of information and data documenting what the student currently knows and is able to do. This is on page 10. Again, it's a summary. So when I say that, that doesn't mean, and I see this quite frequently, people want to fill up those boxes and they're dropping integrated assessment report. If it's an initial, they're dropping all kinds of integrated assessment information in that report. Well, this says it's a summary of information, but the most important piece is data documenting what the student currently knows and is able to do. And we're going to talk about that in a lot of detail. So again, the areas, and if you guys have been in this field for a while, you know that these are what the present level areas that we need to address. So we're going to be looking at communication, academic performance, health, vision, hearing, and motor abilities, social emotional status, general intelligence. We're going to be looking at transition needs for those students 14 years and older, functional vision learning media assessment for our blind students, functional hearing, listening, and communication assessment for our deaf and hard of hearing students. These are all on page 10. So again, I mentioned this a little bit earlier, that the present levels provide the basis for generating goals, supports, and services to meet individual student needs. So everything must be linked to the present level section on the IEP that we find in the rest of the IEP. Now here's another important thing. The present level should be written in brief, clear, specific statements to describe a student's current skill level in objective, measurable terms. So this is really difficult. And the reason it's difficult if you do not have data to support what you're doing with the student. So we're going to look at some examples. And some of these are in your guidance document. So we see this quite frequently. We'll see vague phrases like, is active and doesn't pay attention. Well, I don't know exactly what that looks like for this particular student. And we all know that when we receive IEPs and we don't have specific data in there and we're looking, we may interpret it one way when it's really meant differently for that particular child. So a specific phrase might look like, and this is more meaningful, attends for 1 to 2 minutes during a large group activity during a 10-minute observation period. So I've got some data there. So I know for this particular child, he only attends for 1 to 2 minutes. When I go to the other side for the vague phrases and says it's active, I'm thinking he's jumping up out of his chair and he's running all over the room. But for this particular child, what that looks like, that he can only stay on task for 1 to 2 minutes during a large group activity. And here's another one, doesn't speak clearly. So my background, I'm an SLP by trade. And so when I think of doesn't speak clearly, I think this student has articulation problems. But in actuality, for this particular child, they only speak in 1 or 2 word utterances 90% of the time. So that's more meaningful. It's very specific. And that's the types of statements we're going to be looking for. Okay, so we're going to ignore where it says use the text tool. So here is a vague phrase. Just on a sheet of paper, write down how you could reword this. So this one says, has difficulty following classroom rules. And so write that down, and Tamara, get a couple of volunteers and share with us what they came up with. Tamara, you'll have to unmute when you're ready to share those with us. Do you have any volunteers?
Oh yeah, they're going to volunteer.
Sounds like they're being voluntold.
Are you ready, Miss Julie?
I just said during students touching, I would say maybe
During group time, a student can't keep his hands to himself.
So can we make that more measurable? So does can't mean they 0% of the time?
Can you hear Miss Julie back there in the corner?
Again, I was
during a 10-minute observation, the student touched another student 6 times, and we want to reduce that to.
During a 10-minute observation, the student touched another student 6 times, and we want to reduce that to.
Well, I don't, and that's good. I think I would stop it during a 10-minute observation. The student touched another student or other students 6 times during a 10-minute period. We're not going to talk about we want to reduce it yet until we get to the measurable annual goals. Then we're going to look at how we can, but the 6 times gives me really good information. So during a 10-minute period, he touched, and so that gives us a starting point. That's great. Anybody else come up with anything else?
That Weber did.
I said when given simple directives and in parentheses, get out notes, stay seated, etc. Student does not follow teacher directions 90% of the time during a 30-minute time period.
Okay, so that gives us a starting point. So you're being a little bit more specific. Let's see if what we have here. So here's one that's more specific. An example: follows classroom rules using visual cues 80% of the time. So the thing about this one, it gives another piece of information that we can use when we're designing the IEP. Do you guys see anything in there that's some good information? Do you know what I'm talking about? Tamara, can anybody guess? I'm giving you a vague question.
It shows that the student needs visual cues.
There you go. So when we get ready to talk about supports, we know that visual cues are something that we were probably going to use to design into our measurable annual goals. Good deal. All right, let's try another one. Oh, we forget we've got these little click-in things. So that's brief, it's clear, it's specific, skill specific. That's what we're looking for, specific skills. It's objective and measurable. Okay, here's another one. Doesn't follow directions. Can anybody be working on a specific phrase that might provide a more specific skills measurement and so forth?
Ms. Page is ready.
Good deal. What did she come up with?
Student needs verbal prompts when doing a two-step task.
You hear her?
Yeah, so he needs visual prompts when doing two-step, what?
Verbal prompts. He needs verbal prompts when doing a two-step task.
So could we extend that a little bit more? So what percentage of time does he require that? Is it 100% of the time, or collecting some data?
80% is good.
Yeah. Okay. So let's see what we have on here. So this one says requires a verbal and physical prompt when given one-step directives 100% of the time. So again, having more than just what they require, but what percentage of time do they require that type of assistance? And again, this is brief, skill specific, that's with one-step directions, following one-step directions, and objective and measurable. Okay, here's another one. Is weak in reading. How could we make that more specific?
Okay, Miss Jessie's ready.
Oh, Miss Jessie, come on, bring it on.
Reads 55 words per minute on a third grade level with 90% accuracy.
Love it. So on that one, you might not need the 90% accuracy. So this one is reads 45 words per minute on grade level text. So the 45 words per minute would be your measurement. You could be doing something like reads 20 words on the 50 high frequency word list. So that's enough because we know that 20 is our measurement. That's our starting point. So if we do a measurable annual goal, we might want to see by the end of the year, he's going to be reading 40 out of 50 high frequency words on that list. So there's a starting point. So again, these are brief, clear, skill specific, and objective. So again, these are all in your guidance documents, and so we just realized as we were doing this that those were the same examples from the books that you didn't have to really think very hard on because we had the answers in the guidance document, but that's okay. So that's a reference. So because I can't see the slides and what's coming up next, I think this is where I do this. So Tamara, I want you to have all your people in the room raise their right hand. They have to take an oath. Raise your right hand. Are they raising them? I can't see them.
Get them up high.
High. Okay, this is where you take an oath. And you repeat after me. I promise I will no longer use vague phrases.
I will no longer use vague phrases
Such as. Has difficulty with.
Has difficulty with.
Struggles with.
Troubles with.
Struggles. Yeah. So I'm trying to think, Carla, I'm gone blank on the other ones, but these are things you will no longer use. You're going to be doing very specific, measurable terms. And we see that a lot. In the present levels, we'll see things like Johnny struggles with blah, 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 blah. Well, that is a cue to me. I don't have any data on that. That's an opinion. So I want to see very clear, measurable data related to a specific skill in an IEP present level.
Another one is weekend.
This weekend. Thank you, Carla. I knew you could remember these. You guys, this is my birthday, and I'm older, and my memory is really bad today because I've gotten older. I've got 1 year older. So yes, is weekend, struggles with, has difficulty with. Those are the things we do not want to see. Okay. So some things that we want to look at when we're designing the present level is have an understanding of these terms. We're going to be looking at what's meant by baseline performance, commensurate with similar age peers, relative strengths, needs or concerns related to the disability, and adverse effect. These are in your appendix as well, Appendix D, and also we're in page 11 of your guidance document. And these are things that we really need to see in the present level statements for any area that's not marked commensurate with similar age peers. And so those areas that are marked commensurate with similar age peers, you do not have to put any information in there in that section. But any section that's not marked commensurate with similar age peers, we're going to need to see baseline performance, relative strengths, needs or concerns, and an adverse effect statement. So let's talk about baseline performance. So the thing about baseline performance is you can't measure progress if you don't know where you started. And I share this example all the time because I'm always struggling. Listen, I'm going to use a vague term, struggling with my weight. But the thing is, I know I put on, and COVID has not helped any. I know I put on weight, my pants are getting tighter, but I don't want to get on the scales to see how bad it is. So I'll start a diet and I'll start losing some weight. And when I feel like I've lost some, then I might get on the scales and see what I weigh. But I really don't know my progress because I didn't get a starting point. I didn't get on the scales at the beginning and know exactly where I started. So that's the same way with our kids and when we get to our measurable annual goals, we cannot set a goal if we don't know their skill level as a starting point. Where are they? And it needs to be very specific. So baseline data is critical and must be included in the sections that are not marked commensurate with similar age peers. We're going to have to be able to find some baseline performance data in the present level sections for any area not marked commensurate with similar age peers. The baseline performance describes the student's current performance. That's why I said earlier, and we're going to talk about whether an IQ score would serve as baseline performance, but you can't use old data. It has to be something that's another great example with my weight. So if I'm getting ready to go in for a physical, and a little more than a year ago, I had my other physical. Well, I know a little more than a year ago, I weighed a lot less than I weigh now. So my current weight is what's going to be my actual baseline performance now, not what was in my physical more than a year ago. And so the baseline performance should be the starting point for an IEP instruction. So when I keep saying it's got everything in the IEP has to tie into your present level. So when I have a measurable annual goal that I've set for a child, I'm going to go back into the present level and find the baseline data that matches up with that. Where was the starting point for this particular student? When we're looking at initial IEPs, we're going to collect student performance data. Subsequent IEPs, we can use IEP progress monitoring data, but if they've met that particular measurable annual goal, we're going to have to collect some new baseline data. We need to know a new starting point for a skill that we're going to be putting in the current IEP that we're designing. So let's talk about some things. If we're talking about baseline performance, it needs to be data that tells us specifically how student is performing with a particular skill. So when we look at being able to find things that are skill related, I want you to, and Tamara, you can tell us if the agreement was yes or no. Would IEP progress monitoring data provide us skill data that we could use for baseline performance? If they agree, do thumbs up. If they disagree, do thumbs down. And tell us if they said yes or no. So remember, we're looking at specific skills, and they said yes. So yes. Okay. Well, it's not.
IEP progress. Okay. Oh,
sorry. It brought up. I did too many clicks, and it brought up everything. Yes, it would be. But since I've already identified, what do they think about a doctor's diagnosis? Does that give us skill-specific data? Yes or no?
we would have said no on that one,
Yeah,
sure.
said no. So
No.
That's correct. So, but we see that a lot. Now, Carla, I'm going to click again. I'm going to see if it's going to bring it up. Yes. Okay. So here's what happens, guys. We see this a lot in that health, vision, motor, hearing section. We'll see things like Johnny has ADHD. Okay, so that's a doctor's diagnosis, and that's pretty much what we'll see in the health, vision, motor section. So is that skill specific? No. So we're going to have to, yeah. Do all ADHD kids demonstrate the same characteristics? No. So we're going to have to collect some data on what his ADHD looks like for this particular child. So we're going to have to collect some skill-specific data. How many times he's off task during a certain period of time? How many times he was up out of his chair during a certain period of time? How many times he touched another kid if he can't keep his hands to himself? So we've got to have more data. So keep in mind, whatever the diagnosis is, if you put it in the present level section, because that's some information we kind of need to know, but it doesn't give us skill specific. So we're going to have to collect some information to put in there as our baseline data. Okay, what about response to intervention data? Would that be skill specific data we could use? Yes or no?
Yes.
Yes. That's if you have really good response to intervention data. And so we're seeing a lot of districts still have gaps in this area, that they're not collecting really good skill-specific data. But if it's current, it's an initial IEP, and it gives you some information that you can use, you could use that as baseline data. What about classroom-based assessments? Could you use that information? Would it provide skill-specific data?
Yes.
Yes, it depends on what you're collecting, and you could use that in both the initial and annual review. What about IQ scores? Is that considered a baseline performance?
No.
Okay, so that would be no, because remember, that's the collection of a global score. It doesn't break it down for skill-specific starting point for an IEP. Now, if it's current information, I could include that in the present level, because the regulations do also say when we're designing IEPs, we've got to consider results of evaluation, whether that's state evaluation data, eligibility evaluation data. We consider that and we can include it. But I'm just going to do a brief summary of that. I'm not going to drop the whole integrated assessment report in the IEP, but I might summarize that the student's intellectual abilities fell within the standard score of 69. But then the rest of my data is going to be, so what does that look like for this student's general intellectual abilities with particular skills that fall within that? I'm going to collect some baseline data for that. What about work samples? Could you use that as baseline performance data?
I don't think so. Yes.
Yes, if you have some actual skills that you can measure within that. And then the last example is standardized scores. Could you use that? Standard scores of achievement. So like if we're doing the WISC or the Woodcut-Johnson.
We don't think so.
No. So that's very similar to the IQ score. Again, I might put a brief summary, but I'm not going to list every subtest and everything on there, because that's not information that I'm going to use to design my measurable annual goals when I get to that section. Okay, so we're going to do a little baseline performance activity. And typically when we do this activity, we have you guys participate, but since we're not there, we're going to try this, and it's not as effective as if we were there in person. But one of the things we're going to do, and some of you have attended our IEP training before, so you kind of know how this works, is that Carla is going to be our guinea pig, and we've already taken some video of her doing this activity, but Carla is going to play jacks for us. And so in the first video, before we get her started, I want you to think about Carla. And so she's going to, if you've ever played jacks, you know that you throw the little jack pieces on the table. Carla, stop it for a minute. Whoa! Sorry. And she's going to, whoops. Carla, it's playing.
I'm trying to get it to stop.
Sorry, we're ruining the surprise. So she's got to pick up a jack. She's got to bounce the ball and pick up a jack in the same hand that she's going to catch the ball back in. And so there's 10 jacks on the table. And we want Carla to pick up as many jacks as she can in 30 seconds. And so I want you to write down on a piece of paper, looking at Carla, and you know that Carla's a very bright individual. How many jacks can she pick up in 30 seconds? And this is going to be considered her baseline. So write down on the piece of paper. Remember, there's 10 jacks, but if she gets the ball, she's going to throw them back down and keep going. And we're not going to play rounds. We're just single jacks. How many do you think she can get in 30 seconds? So you got that on your piece of paper? All right, now, Carla, you can play the video. Now see if you can count them. Okay, so Tamara, ask in the room, how many jacks did they see Carla get? I know it's hard to watch that video because it kind of streams funny, but how many jacks, guys, did you see Carla pick up in 30 seconds?
We really didn't see any of it. It started, we only saw about maybe 5 or 6 seconds, and then we could see the pink ball fly over, and that was all we saw. So sorry, give me a number, somebody. 7, they said.
I'm so sorry you didn't see it, because basically, how many jacks did you see her pick up before the ball flew over? Did you see? One. So
Wes said 1.
She's not. The rest of the time, she's chasing the ball. So she.
Okay, good job, Wes.
Yeah, she only got 1 during that time. So, okay. So now Carla's had a little experience with this. She's tried it one time. Now you saw what happened to her. She lost the ball after her first jack pickup. We're going to do it again. We're going to give her another opportunity. So, and hopefully this one will play better. So write down again on a piece of paper, knowing what you know about Carla, how many jacks do you think she'll pick up in 30 seconds? And we're going to play it again. We're going to do it again. Okay. All right, Carla, let's go.
I don't know if it's playing, but we're not seeing anything. Okay, there we go. There, it's going really fast.
Oh, so sorry. It's streaming.
It's working now.
Okay, and so we probably lost count. Carla, did you by any chance count as it was going?
I think it was 9 that time.
Okay, so let's say it was 9. So Carla got 9 that time. So one of the things when we're looking at collecting baseline data is you do not just do one data point. Because if you can see with Carla, the first time she did the jack, she only got 1. Then she did it a second time, and we're going to say she got 7. So that's a big difference. So if I had just used that first data point and designed my measurable annual goal, let's say I just thought, oh, she is lousy with playing jacks. So by the end of the year, I want Carla to be able to pick up 7 jacks in 30 seconds. Well, if I set that as her measurable annual goal, the next time I did that with her, she's now met her goal, because that one data point was not enough information for me to call it my baseline data. So one of the things that we look at, let's see if I can get it to go. Give me just a second. I'm going to go back through these. Sorry. Okay, so we're going to look at calculating baseline data, and we're going to look at two methods to do that. So typically, you want to have at least 4 to 5 to 6 data points to be able to do your baseline data. And so once I have those different data points, I can either do what's called the mean, where I'm going to average all of the scores into one. So on a piece of paper, which we don't have enough data points. So if I took 1 and 7 and average those, then my baseline is going to be a 4. Now, another way to do it is do what's called the median. And you need to have at least 3 numbers to be able to do this. So you're going to line up your numbers from the lowest to the highest, and you'll take the actual middle number. So if I had 6 numbers, I would take the average of the 2 in the middle. But we're going, so that when we typically do this, they're pretty similar, but sometimes with the mean, there's problems with what we call outliers. And so you guys know what that means by when you're doing grades. So if I have a kid who bombed something and he got a 0, but most of his scores are 100, and I average those, it really messes up my data. So sometimes it's better to use the mean, and sometimes it's better to use the median. Okay, so but just know there's 2 ways, but the most important piece of this is that you're not going to just use one data point to say that's your baseline data. I've got to collect several data points and come up with either through the mean or the median with what my baseline is. So think about what instruction would look like for this particular skill. So if we were working with Carla on her JAC skills, what would we need to work on? Do you think this is a totally different side? So with her, we're going to be looking at hand coordination. We might be looking at some grasping skills, those kinds of things. And that's what we're going to be working on with her. We might even provide her with larger jacks to practice with. So just know that if we change what we're using, whoops, I need to go back. Can you go back one, Carla? If we change what we're using and we're doing instruction, we'll be collecting some data, but that's not going to be what we're going to use for our progress monitoring. Because with progress monitoring, we need to use the original materials and skill that we were evaluating for when we took our baseline data to measure progress. So to make the point, so when I use the smaller jacks, I use the smaller ball. I gave her 30 seconds. And so, but I may be teaching her now with larger jacks and a larger ball, and I give her a longer amount of time as I'm doing the instruction. But when I need to measure her progress to see what gain she's making toward that original skill, I've got to go back and use the materials and the time limit to collect the data to see her progress from what I did when I did the baseline data. And you're going to make sure that you use the same tool. And we see this a lot. People will change how they collected baseline data. For Carla, we were doing frequency count. And so we were counting every time she was able to pick up the ball. But when I was progress monitoring, I created a rubric and I was looking at several different things, and she had to get 3 out of 5 on this particular scale. I can't compare that to where her baseline was. I don't need to change the tool. And again, back to the weight example, if I start my diet journey by, let's say I'm just going to measure my body parts, and then I start my diet, and then I stand on the scales to collect my data as I'm going through my progress, that's totally different tool. It doesn't tell me the same thing. So when we're instructing, we can use different materials, we can use different time things, and that's appropriate. But to measure the progress, we've got to go back and look at how we did our baseline collection. So any questions there on baseline? Tamara, see if there's any questions up to this point on baseline performance, because now we're going to move to commensurate with similar age peers. Good?
They say no.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so areas that we are looking at commensurate with similar age peers, keep in mind there's a range of development, and it doesn't mean the student's on grade level. And I know people have a hard time with this concept because, so what I try to do is align it with how did the student qualify with a disability? So if they fall in a disability range, then we know that they're not going to be commensurate with similar age peers. And it's okay when we have a student who, let's say, qualified in the area of other health impairment because of attention deficit disorder, and they're not on grade level in the area of reading. I know people, they tremble at marking that box commensurate with similar age peers. But in a way they are, because not every kid in that grade is reading on grade level. And that student didn't qualify with a disability in the area of reading. They qualified with a disability because of the other health impairment. So keep that in mind as you're looking at that. So any section that is not marked commensurate with similar age peers, those are the sections that we're going to have to address some of those other areas that we mentioned earlier: needs or concerns, relative strengths, baseline performance, and adverse effect. So again, this is a really critical thing to understand. It doesn't mean they're on grade level. There is a range of development, and it is okay to mark that box commensurate with similar age peers, even though they're not reading on grade level or they're not performing on grade level in a certain area when it's not their disability area. Okay. Whoop. Carla, take me back one. Sorry. So the other thing we need to look at, and this is an important piece as well too, is the relative strengths. We're going to be looking at what does the student do well in light of their disability. And so keep in mind, this is another area that we tend to see kind of glossed over in the present level, or it's some things that are judgment statements. So we'll see people writing there, Mary is a pleasant child, and they're calling that their strength. Saying Mary is a pleasant child is a judgment statement. It's an opinion statement. It's not really related to the student's disability. So when we're looking at their strengths, what is it they do well in light of their disability? So an example might be a child who has a learning disability in reading. But this particular child, typically children who have learning disabilities in reading do not like to read. But maybe for this particular child, when they're called upon to read, when the teacher requests students to read and volunteer to read, this particular child volunteers to read frequently. When it's independent time, the student chooses a book and sits and reads a book. So those would be some things that would be a strength for her. So again, we're trying to tie it into what is something that they do well in light of their disability. Another thing that you could use for relative strength, so this is an annual review and I'm creating a new IEP and they've met a particular goal from the previous IEP, that has now become a strength for that child. So I can include that information. So if my goal last time was that Mary was going to read 40 words out of the 50 high frequency word list, and you met that goal, I could put it at Mary now reads 40 out of 50 high frequency words, and that now becomes a strength for her. So again, it's something relative to the student's disability that they do well. Then the other thing that we're going to...
Patty, I have a...
Yes.
I'm sorry. I had a question asked on the last slide when you were talking about being commensurate with same age peers. would you only for MMD, would you only fill out general intelligence because that's how they qualify
No, so
based
with,
on IQ?
so with MMD, they also have to have a deficit in academic skills. So, and your adaptive skills. So you would put your academic area would go in the academic section. And then your general intelligence information would go in your general intelligence. So then the adaptive skills, I always tell people to look at. So if I'm doing a Vineland, I don't know what you guys typically use for your adaptive measure, because there's not a section in your present level called adaptive skills, but there are sections on the Vineland that are broken down into communication. So if that's an area that's effective on the adaptive skills, I would put that in my communication section. I think there's some skills in there related to motor, those kinds of things, if that's the area. So you try to find where those adaptive skills fit, because you're describing the student's performance for each of those areas. And again, the general intelligence has got to have some information because that's how they qualify. So I thought you were going to ask me, and I probably don't even want to bring this up because this is kind of a gray area. I thought you were going to ask me if a student qualifies for ADHD and, they're not on grade level for reading, and you end up putting measurable annual reading goals in the IEP. How do you do that? So again, I'm trying to tie it into the disability. And if the kid qualifies as ADHD, that health, vision, motor section is where the majority of the information needs to go. It's really where the information is. So how does that, so again, this child does have some reading deficits, but is it related to the ADHD? And if so, then how does that present itself? And it needs to go in the health, vision, motor section. How does that ADHD impact the reading? So is it because the kid's not on task and he has to be prompted back to reading the passage? So that would be included in the characteristics of that health impairment in the health, vision, and motor section. Okay.
So, yes, thank you for addressing that. I know we've talked about that numerous times, but I do have some new teachers. So let me take about 30 seconds, just a second. So just take about 30 seconds to make sure you understand what she's saying about students with ADHD, because we all know that they are behind academically as well, many of them. It just has to be addressed in the present levels.
But is it reading? Right. Is it really a reading disability? I want to think that through. Is it really a reading disability, or are their reading skills impacted because of that health impairment? And that's what you've got to make that connection. And if they're qualifying, if they didn't qualify with a learning disability in reading, it's not really a reading disability. It's that disability is what's impacting their ability to read. So we need to really be addressing, we can't work on that disability through reading goals. And that's what we typically see. We'll see people identified as other health impaired,
right,
go straight to academic goals, but you're really not working on that disability. You're working on the effect of the disability, and that's not changing that disability. So hopefully that kind of helps a little bit. And I know, again, that's a pretty much gray area. And we tend to see the same thing. I almost even hate to get here too, with DD kids. So DD kids do not qualify based on academics. They qualify under those areas of cognitive, communication, motor, social, emotional, those kinds of areas. That's the disability. So they need to go in the current present level sections of what relates to that disability. And those are the skills that we need to be working on. And again, we see a number of students who go straight to an academic skill for DD. Okay, good question.
So for instance, yes, I just kind of clarify because I've got preschool in here. So for instance, when parents fill out the self-help portion and we work on those skills, that would go under social emotional, the social part on the present levels.
Yes.
For DD.
Right, because that's an area that's for DD is social emotional. So it would go under the social.
We fill out all
So
those different areas.
so
Okay.
let me, that's a good point too, Tamara, before I forget this. So those kids who are ADHD, a lot of times, not all the time, but sometimes you'll have a kid who has social emotional issues as well. They hit other kids, they're doing those kinds of things. So that would probably fall under the social emotional section. So we'll have a section, you know, of what that ADHD looks like in the health, vision, and motor section, but off task and those kinds of things. But if they're an aggressive kid and they're doing some other types of behaviors, then that would also be filled out in the social, that information would be contained in the social emotional section. But just because you have an ADHD kid doesn't mean they get both sections filled out. It would just depend on what it looks like for these kids. And the main thing I want to say, again, before I forget this, that's why they call it an individualized education program. They don't look the same for every kid. So I can't tell you every ADHD kid is only going to have the health, vision, and motor section filled out. Because in a minute, we're going to talk a little bit more about the special factors, and behavior is a big piece that we've got to look at for all kids,
Right. I was going to say, we discussed this in our PLC Monday, so I'm glad you're going to reiterate that for us.
Yeah.
About having behavior goals and things.
Okay. All right. Give me a second to get where we're going. Okay. So we talked about relative strengths. Now we're going to talk about needs or concern related to disability. Again, all of this is in regulation. When it says designing the IEP, you need to look at the relative strengths of the child and needs or concerns related to the disability. So this is how the student qualified for special education services. And when we say needs or concerns, those are those skill deficits. So it's got to be related to the disability category and how they met eligibility for special education. So if I'm an SLD student in the area of reading, then in the academic section, if I have things like reads 20 words per minute as a third grader, and typically developing third graders, I'm making this up, read 50 words per minute. So that's going to show me the needs or concerns related to the SLD for this particular child. So, and again, we've got to have baseline data for the needs or concerns. So as we identify the skill deficit, we've got to have the baseline data to go with that, which becomes our starting point for instruction. So we've got our relative strengths, we've got our needs or concerns, and the other thing is the adverse effect statement. So the first thing is showing you the definition of adverse effect. And this is that the progress of the student is impeded by the disability to the extent that the educational performance is significantly and consistently below the level of similar peers. God, this is the definition. And I don't know, Tamara, if your teachers have been teaching if you've got any that's been teaching for 20 years or so, somehow years ago, teachers were told they had to write those words significantly and consistently in the adverse effect statement. And I'm going to release you of that burden if you're still doing it, because that's not what's required. That's just rewriting the definition, and it will not meet the standard, because what the standard is, the adverse effect must tell how the disability affects the student's involvement and progress in the general curriculum. So again, sometimes we overwork ourselves and we put stuff and fluff in our present levels that are not required, and we miss the requirement. So again, the adverse effect statement must tell how, and we're going to show some examples of that in a minute. But I also want to caution you to not use words such as may or may not. So something we've seen before is Mary's reading deficits may affect her ability to blah, blah, blah. So if I say may, that means that we don't know. And it has to affect her progress in the general curriculum to meet the definition. So make sure that you're using terminology that really shows that it does affect their progress. So let me click to the next screen.
Sorry, I was unmuting so I could say something. Along with may adversely affect, Also avoid the word will adversely affect, because like Patty said, it needs to adversely affect. So not that it may or will, but it does.
Yeah, so we're going to give you some examples of what that could look like.
Ah.
It has to really show the skills and the deficits. So here's some example. And so the first one is Linda's deficits in writing affect her ability. Notice it does. It affects her ability to produce different types of written products for varied purposes, which is a requirement of the 4th grade curriculum. So it's skill specific. She has writing deficits. And so we also pulled in, it affects her ability to produce different types of written products. So where does that come from? Where does that wording come from? Does anybody know? Should come from your standards, from your writing standards. So we've now tied in the curriculum and showing how it's affecting her progress in the general curriculum by showing specifically what her deficits affect. So then another example is Linda's deficits in math affect her ability to count beyond 20 and solve word problems using addition and subtraction within 20, which are part of the 1st grade level standards, making it difficult for her to access the 3rd grade level standards. So she's actually in the 3rd grade, but she is performing at much lower level. And so she's got deficits even at being the ability to count beyond 20. Now, an important thing about your adverse effect statement, if I'm going to have some statement like this, that Linda's deficit in math affects her ability to count beyond 20, then earlier in the present level section, I'm going to have some baseline data specific to that particular skill. I can't just out of the blue have an adverse effect statement that doesn't tie in with the rest of the present level section. Even back to Linda and her deficits with writing and written products, I'm going to have some baseline data information prior to this adverse effect statement showing up in my present level that ties that in together. Okay, another example. And this is for a student with speech sound errors that Addison, yes.
We have a question.
Yes.
Okay, I'm a total novice. This is Crystal, you know I'm not special ed, I'm not a special ed teacher. When you say examples of adverse effect statements come from standards, does that mean the standards where the student is currently working or grade level standards? And is that a stupid question?
Okay, so I want to make sure that I'm clear. It doesn't have to have the standard reference there. We were just using that as an example of how you could show that as an adverse effect and that it is affecting her in the curriculum. So Carla, can you take me back one screen? So in the second example, we were using some wording from the 1st grade level standard because she's even not able to do those kinds of skills, even though she's in the 3rd grade level. So you don't have to pull it from the standards, and I'm going to give you some other examples in a minute, show you that. We just like that connection because you got to show what's affecting their progress in the general curriculum. So by pulling in the standards, I'm able really to make a clear connection, but you don't actually have to do that. So let me give you I'll give you some other examples and maybe it'll help. We've got quite a few. So the next one was on speech sound production. And so this one shows that Addison's deficits in speech sound production affect her participation in activities that involve phonics. So we're actually tying this into more of a curriculum-based approach with the speech sound errors. It doesn't have to be this way. The speech therapists tend to tie it into other type of effect statements, but this one is really good tying it into the general curriculum. Affects her ability to participate in activities that involve phonics, which require her to identify spelling sound correspondence when the words consist of L, S, Z, L blends, and the S blends. In addition, her deficits affect her ability to converse with peers and engage in spontaneous conversations, as she is often asked to repeat herself due to speech sound errors. So in my present level, I'm going to be finding some things that are relative to how often she's asked to repeat herself. And then with those letter sounds, I'm going to show how she's able to produce those and have some baseline data relative to that in the present level before I get to my adverse effects statement. Most of the time with the speech therapist, we'll see a lot about how it affects their ability to converse with peers and engage in conversation with adults. Well, if that's what I have in the present level section, if what previous I have with that is just, they produce the L sound with 40% accuracy, the S sound with 30% accuracy, but I have no data showing how that affects them in relation to talking with peers or adults, I've missed a connection. That all needs to tie in together. Some more examples. So this one is actually for those that have the hardest ones to write. Now, again, I don't want these examples taken and written in everybody's IEP, is the general intelligence one. So this is an example of that. So Betty's deficits with abstract reasoning / problem solving affect her ability to process information at the same pace, speed and accuracy, and quantity as her similar age peers, and in real life situations that require a quick decision, example, recall and respond. So this is where you could get some information from your school psychologist in some of those evaluations. So what areas are particularly affected in the general intelligence area for this particular student? So abstract reasoning is one. Problem solving is another area. Processing speed. So we're going to include that type of information in our adverse effects statement. And again, I need to know with some baseline data what that looks like skill-wise in the rest of the present level section. More examples. Here's some social skills type examples. Jody's deficits with social awareness interfere with her ability to read and understand social situations and boundaries when in large group setting with same age peers. So we're going to see that when she's with the large group or with her peers, she may be in their faces. She doesn't know how to keep her boundaries. You know how we have the space between people, being able to keep your boundaries intact. That's kind of baseline data we want to see with her. Amanda's lack of social interaction skills and inability to recognize the inappropriateness of her verbalizations affect her ability to self-advocate and to participate appropriately in a real-world group activities with her peers. Again, I'm going to probably looking to see if I have data on inappropriate verbalizations and anytime that she's blurting out or doing some things like that. So the most important piece with the present level section is if the student moved to another district tomorrow, could their new teacher read the present levels and know his or her instructional strengths and needs? And I don't know about you guys, but I'm sure that you received an IEP and you read it and you thought, I don't have a clue what this is talking about. So going back to thinking about, I said that I have a physical coming up this month. And I do have some health issues that I am treated for. So, and I paid quite a bit of money to have all these tests run to get my treatment plan in place that tends to be working for me. But if that information was not shared meaningfully with a new doctor I go to, and they had to start all over and have new tests run and gather what information they need to find out about what's going on with me and charge me for that, I'm not going to be a very happy camper. And number one, it's costing me money, but number two, it's costing me time in my treatment. And so it's the same way with our kids that move in with IEPs. If the next teacher cannot pick it up and immediately run with that IEP and know what to do, and we have to start all over with gathering some data and trying to figure out that kid, that student has lost time, and that's not right to be doing to our kids. This is a group that do not need to lose any time in their instruction. Many of them are behind, and they need to continue to move forward, and so we need to write our IEPs at a level that the next person can pick it up and know exactly what they need to do. Okay, so when you get ready to work on your IEP, it's important that you need to know how the student is eligible for special education services. And so I'm going to challenge you each time that you're working on a new student, and even ones that you've had, make sure you go back and read the conference summary when eligibility was determined, and be clear on how they actually are eligible for special education. So why I'm saying that, when I was a director in the district that I worked in, there were times that we had students that were only eligible in the area of reading for a specific learning disability. And for whatever reason, somebody added math goals one year. And for 4 years in a row, this student continued to be put in a resource class for math, and they never qualified in that area. So that's very concerning, and in a way, we have denied that child appropriate education for those 4 years, and that could have been a really big issue. It should have been a really big issue. So you need to be very clear, how does this child qualify, and make sure that the IEP aligns with that area of disability. And you need to know the characteristics of that student's disability. Again, as I've said many times, ADHD kids don't all look the same. So if they're eligible under OHI, and that's another prime example. Typically, when I hear OHI, I'm thinking ADHD, but there's other medical conditions that qualify a student for other health impairments. So we can't just assume, we need to know. And then we need to know exactly how that disability affects their progress in the general curriculum, and then we need to have current progress data or current baseline data as we begin to prepare that IEP. So with that being said, you've got to remember that the present level provides the basis for everything, and there must be a linkage throughout the IEP to the present level section. So here are the steps for writing your present levels. Number one, you need to identify what the student's grade level is or age level standards, either using the Kentucky Academic Standards, or for early childhood, you're going to use the Kentucky Early Childhood Standards. So we need to know where they should be in those standards. So if this is a third grader, I'm going to be looking at the third grade standards and looking at what they need to be doing at the third grade level. But then I'm going to look at what performance data I actually have collected on that child and determine their performance level. So where are they? This is where they need to be, but this is actually where they are. That's step number 2. And then I'm going to look at the performance levels for communication, general intelligence, the academics, all those areas on the present level section. And for any area that is not marked commensurate with similar age peers, I'm going to have to describe the relative strengths, the needs or concerns, the baseline performance, and then their performance level in relationship to similar age peers. So if we're going to put some information they're able to do, this is how they're functioning in a particular skill, we kind of need some comparison levels. So what does that look like? This is they're performing this way, but typically students at this grade level are performing at this level. And we'll show you some examples of that in a minute. And then finally, we're going to have to describe how the student's performance affects involvement and progress in the general curriculum for any area that's not marked commensurate with similar age peers. So again, we've gone through these steps. You identify the student's grade level, where they're functioning. Then we're going to describe relative strengths, needs, or concerns, baseline performance, and relationship to similar age peers, and then how the student's performance affects involvement and progress in the general curriculum. So there's another thing. In your guidance document booklet, I want you to look at pages 13 through 35. And these are what we call present level guiding questions. And this is a gold mine to really help you look at designing your present levels. So they're going to help you be able to identify some things to look at to collect some baseline data for. It's not an exhaustive list. The question should just serve as a prompt that should be relevant to the student's needs related to the disability. One of the areas I think is most helpful is looking at that general intelligence section, because that's the area we do not know what we're supposed to be looking at to collect some baseline data for. So that would be one area that would be particularly helpful in using these guiding questions. Again, that's for each one of those areas that is listed on the present level section. You will find guiding questions to help you collect some information to be used when you're designing your present levels. Another thing you need to know with that, with each one of those areas, there's also guiding questions regarding behavior. And I know it seems a little bizarre. So even with the first section, the communication area, there's some guiding questions related to behavior in that section. And the reason we need to know that is because we're going to have to, when we look at the considerations for special factors, we're going to be looking at behavior as it applies to all disabilities, not just for students who are in the area of behavior, emotional behavior disability. We have to look at considering behavior concerns for all disability areas. So you'll see those questions listed for each section. So now we're going to do a little practice. So in the handouts that we sent for you to print out, there was an IEP for a student called with the name of Lucas. And so we want you to pull that out, and hopefully you brought your highlighters with you. So one of the things that you're going to do, we only want you to look at the reading area, just reading, the academic for reading only. And we want you to take your highlighters. And with the yellow highlighter, we want you to identify what are Lucas's strengths. What are his relative strengths in the area of reading? And then with the green highlighter, you're going to identify the needs or concerns. So that would be your skill deficits. And then with a blue highlighter, you're going to highlight the baseline data for your needs or concerns. So wherever we see the skill deficits, what's our baseline data to go with that? If you see any performance level in relationship to similar age peers, highlight that in pink. And finally, find your adverse effect statement and highlight that in orange. But not only that, I want you to answer the question. When I look at my adverse effect statement, does it indicate how? Can I answer how the disability affects the progress in the general curriculum based on the adverse effect statement? So we're going to give you a few minutes to do that. Carla, how much time do we have for this? Okay, we're going to give you 4 minutes. Ready, go.
Hello.
Hey,
Hey. What's going on?
have you heard?
No.
She's gone.
I knew when I saw your name that's probably what was going on.
Leandra just sent me a text. And she died last night.
Oh, me. Okay. Well, I'm glad you called. You don't know anything yet, do you?
No.
All right. Are you going to put it on the group?
Yeah, I'll put it on there right now.
All right. I'm so sorry.
Well, we're just all brokenhearted, and I'm just glad we made the memories we made and stayed close all these years.
Yeah, me too. Me too.
So,
well, I'm glad you called me.
okay.
All right.
I'll
I'll
send
talk
it out.
to you later.
Okay,
Bye.
I love you. Bye.
Okay, let's look at what we found. Whoops. All right, Carla, take me back. So sorry. All right, so here's some things that we found. So Lucas enjoys looking at reading books within his Lexile range and listening to books on tape CDs at the classroom listening station. So we found that as a strength. We also found, and I don't know if yours looks similar to ours, but we also thought that responding to literal questions at 70% was also a strength, as well as he listens to the oral reading of grade level texts across core content areas. So those were some things we highlighted as relative strengths. Then their needs or concern are all highlighted in green, and we've underlined in blue the baseline data. So 75% high frequency sight words, 75% of the multi-syllable words, and then the Dutch words at 65%. He reads 83 words correct per minute with 8 miscues. Inferential questioning at 45%, main characters 60% and 35%. So we were able to find some baseline data and some needs or concerns. In the pink, there is some statements related to performance to similar age peers. This is the hardest one for people to do. I will tell you, and again, I think this is kind of important for parents, and remember that this document is to be written in parent-friendly terms as well too, for parents to see a comparison. So if we're, instead of saying they can't do this, they can't do this, if we put they're able to do da-da-da-da, and then we have a statement of what similar age peers are able to do, it's a little kinder way to show that the child is functioning at a much lower level. But it's really hard to pull those statements in. And I don't want to say that when KDE monitors, they're not really looking for this statement of comparison to similar age peers, but it is something really we're supposed to be including in our IEPs. And it's good information for parents. And finally, the orange shows our adverse effect statement. So Lucas's severe deficits in comprehension and reading fluency affects his ability to read and understand grade level passages, which interferes with his ability to gain information within a typical time period and demonstrate knowledge from any grade level reading materials taught in the general curriculum. So can we align comprehension deficits in our present levels above, as well as reading fluency listed above? And I think we can for both of those. Okay. Let's do the general intelligence section now. We may cut you shorter on this one, but now take the general intelligence section and do the same thing. We'll give you a couple minutes for this. All right, so what we have here, see if you found the same things we did. So we did find a strength. Lucas demonstrated relative strength. And notice they put the words in there. And so it is okay. We've had people ask, can we do sections and write relative strengths? And then we have our narrative beside that. Needs or concern. And then we have our narrative there. Adverse effect. And we have our narrative there. That's fine if you want to put headers like that. Then someone doesn't have to search to see that you've met all of that. But this one, they just put the wording. Lucas demonstrated a relative strength on tasks assessing attention and concentration, as well as visual and auditory discrimination. I'm not exactly sure what that means, but they tied into relative strength. Then they have significant deficits, accessing and applying word knowledge, understanding visual spatial relationships. He may struggle with classroom-based assessment. He has limited ability to plan, demonstrated significant deficits in the ability to store and retrieve. And then they wrote, and we've got that highlighted in green, this may adversely affect Lucas's ability. That's probably going to be your adverse effect statement. So did anybody find any baseline data in this section? I'm not seeing any. So we didn't find any baseline data. And then finally, the bottom we might highlight. And so, oh, Carla was giving the answer away. That's okay. So the other thing we've kind of highlighted to supposedly is your adverse effect statement. So now let's look at some issues with that. So number one, notice it said Lucas performs in the well below average range score on a cognitive assessment administered in October 2016. No, can't do that. That's old data, and you've wasted your energy putting it in there. Let's see what else we found were issues. So it said he may struggle. Well, it's got to, again, show that he does have some deficits that are actual for this particular student. And then it also said it may cause him to work at below average speed. So we're using lots of terminology that is not data driven. These are opinions. May adversely affect Lucas's ability. Once again, it has to. And let's see what other issues, were there any other issues? There's no baseline data. So this one would not meet the required pieces if we were looking at this one for Lucas. And there's no performance level in relationship to similar age peers. Okay, so now we're gonna have to kind of book it. So we want to give you some time to look at an IEP that you brought with one of your students. And we want you to look for a section that's not an area marked commensurate with similar peers. And we're going to give you time to do this as well as taking a break. So get up and move around, but work on this at the same time. So with this, we're going to have you do the same thing. So find an area on your IEP that's not marked commensurate with similar age peers. Use your highlighters. Do the same things. Identify your strengths, needs, or concern, baseline data, and adverse effect statement in any performance level in relationship to similar age peers. So Carla, how much time do we have for them to do this and take a break at the same time? Carla says we have 10 minutes. So break and work on this on your own IEP, and we'll see you back in 10 minutes.
The hardest I can do,
What do you see, like, how straight, and you're meeting concerns, but like this is awesome, because there's long for the meeting concern. So it's definitely right.
This is here because not promoters, it's for children. It's helps social emotional and and they completely, Cameron said that's not what's here. That's just showing you to take care of his personal stuff.
But it's not a need anymore when you take it off. You just leave it with.
Now, we have to do it on the whole, it's really, and we just pick a section.
Yeah, I'll just take it out. I don't think it's really. So you, no, just do like 1 second. Well, she said with adaptive self-help, when you do it, it can break it down into different sections. So if it's something for like some type of motor type thing, it could be in the motor section. Or if it's, academic, adaptive things, that could go.
I called that number. I left the message.
Okay. As we do more of that, she will have your motor.
Because that's what you're just.
And that is also that.
Digging for the person.
So if that, you talk to her, talk to her. Then for anybody, somebody that's. If they want to start, I because he moved after I did that. Well, it's not hard. So it's okay. If she, has it.
Yeah.
With pressure on me. As long as I'm very hard. Yeah. I like your outfit because I like it all divided up separately where it goes. Okay, I moved that. Sure. I moved it all up. Okay, okay.
Are we stopped at 9 minutes?
This is a situation.
Oh, it's still moving.
Yeah, I think it's like that. I think it's. No, it's good. Maybe they're just not back from their breaks yet.
No, I think that the clock is doing something wacky.
Yeah, I'm not sure what's going on with our timer there, but it looks like we've got about 7 minutes left.
No, that wouldn't be right.
Yeah, I think our timer has it's wonky. Okay, maybe we've got 2 minutes left.
Here you go. Tamara, just let us know when everybody gets kind of back seated. Okay, for those of you back in the room, and then when your peers join, point them toward this screen. But looking at your present level statement and what you just did with the highlighting, what did you see was strong about your present level? And then what improvements do you need? And then what did you learn about your present levels and what you need to do differently when writing them in the future? So make a couple of notes, and then we're going to have people share some ahas they had by doing this example. Is Tamara back in the room?
Yeah, we have most.
So leave the mic on. And does anyone want to share what they realize with their present levels and what they would be doing differently?
Strengths and adverse effects listed and the needs, but I need to make sure to include more about baseline data
Perfect.
and how it relates to their same age peers.
Very good. So yes, baseline data is so important. What else did you learn?
Anybody know? Don't look at your line.
Okay, well, just because of time, but this is a good learning experience. So as you're doing your new IEPs, you could also do that activity. So make sure you could even do highlighters, and I make sure that you're meeting every one of those components for any area that's not marked commensurate with language peers. So now we're going to ask you to hold on to your seats because I've taken the majority of the time. Again, the present level is the most important piece, but now Carla's going to have to rush through the rest. So bear with us and hang on.
I think Patty thought just because it's her birthday, she got to take up all the time. So, like Patty said earlier, though, the present levels are the true foundation of the rest of your IEP. So, if you have great and dynamic present level statements, the rest of your IEP is going to fall right into place. So you do want to spend a large bulk of time on those present level statements. So we're going to get into consideration of special factors. And you'll see throughout the rest of the IEP, you should have a linkage between what's in your present levels and then each area that we talk about through the rest of our morning together. So these do need to be consistent with your present level statements. So if you have something, one of these areas that are going to be marked, that it is indicated in the IEP, this should not be the first time that ARC sees information in the consideration of special factors. It should be seen first in those present levels. So we want to be sure the two are consistent with each other. And consideration of special factors begins on page 36 in your guidance document if you want to follow along, and I do encourage you to do that. The first one we're going to look at is behavior. And again, on page 36, this is when a student's behavior impedes his or her learning or that of others. It's any category of disability. And oftentimes we think about behavior being indicated with our EBD students or maybe OHI or autism, but it's for any category of disability. Your decisions have to be data driven. So you have to be able to prove that there are behaviors that impede their learning or that of others. And then you're going to develop strategies to address those behaviors. So what that may look like, you're going to include some positive behavioral interventions that are needed to address that behavior. And so this is what it looks like on Infinite Campus. So if you do indicate that this child has behaviors that impede his or her learning or that of others, then you're going to consider appropriate strategies. And oftentimes we think if behavior is checked yes, that we have to have an FBA and BIP. That's not necessarily the case. What's required is strategies. So you have to have those strategies to address the behavior and address skill gaps. So just like with academics, we're addressing skill gaps. And Patty used this analogy one time, and it really kind of stuck with me. When we have a student that has trouble reading or struggles with writing, then what do? We teach those skills. But so often when we have a student who has some behavior deficits, we give them a check sheet to carry around. And that would be like giving a student a book to carry around and hoping that improves their reading skills. So we have to put strategies in place to address those skill deficits. What are we going to do to teach that student the skill areas where they're deficient? So we have to include that on the consideration of special factors section. Again, not limited to students that are categorized under EBD. We're looking at present level guiding questions. So just like we've got, I believe it was 13 through 35, we had those present level guiding questions. If you look on page 36 of your guidance document, under behavior, you have guiding questions that you can use to help prompt you through each of these special factors. So please, those are very underutilized, not just the present level guiding questions. Those are underutilized very much so. But the consideration of special factors guiding questions are also underutilized. So be sure you're using those to help guide the ARC in making those decisions. And again, you're going to use strategies, and that's not necessarily a behavior intervention plan that may be used, but it's not required. So just keep that in mind. What do those strategies look like? It might be a behavioral contract. It might be some social skills instruction. But in particular with the contract piece, be sure that it's not just a monitoring piece. We have to address those skill deficits. So we're teaching those pro-social behaviors. Then we move along to English learners. And as you see, there are going to be some very explicit questions in that section for consideration of special factors. So this used to be called ELL, English Language Learners, or LEP, Limited English Proficiency. It's now just English Learners, or EL. So for your EL students, the ARC is going to consider their language needs as related to their disability. Again, this can apply to students within any category of disability, but it doesn't pertain to those students who are nonverbal or using a form of sign language. So again, if you indicate that this is a need, then you're going to address in the box right below, what's the relationship of language needs to the IEP? So very explicit questions there on the IEP. And again, you have guiding questions under that special factor piece. So your blind or visually impaired students, you're going to look at, is instruction in Braille needed? Is the use of Braille needed? And then will it be the student's primary mode of communication? And this is just a little note, and this is more kind of compliance. If you indicate on this first question on consideration of special factors, it says, is the child blind or visually impaired? If the ARC indicates no, then you're finished with that section. You don't even have to go through and check any more boxes. You're finished. Now, if it is a special factor, then you'll need to address the other factors listed there. But if it's a no, you're finished. Okay, for communication, you're going to look at students' language and communication needs in the following areas. And for you speech folks that are, if you have any speech folks in the room, you guys know what these areas are. So the question on the IEP is, does the child have communication needs? and then you're going to indicate either yes or no. And again, be sure you look at your guiding questions. Deaf or hard of hearing. So we're looking at the student's language and communication needs, and then opportunities for direct communication. So again, very explicit questions on the IEP that your committee will be addressing. Assistive technology. So the big idea with assistive technology is that's when something is needed to access the curriculum. Not that it's just a nice to have, but it's an essential. It's absolutely essential that the student have that assistive technology to be able to access the curriculum. So assistive technology is different from instructional technology, where you see the picture on the left. It appears that all students are using some sort of tablet. That's more your instructional technology, where assistive technology is going to be you have a student that must have that piece of equipment to access the curriculum. And you have, on the next slide, we'll show you an example of a form that will help guide the ARC in making these decisions. So the ARC has to determine the type of device and or amount of services needed for that device. And again, any category of disability, and then you'll describe that below if you indicate yes. And so you, I believe in the packet, you have this form. This is certainly not a required or mandated form, but it is a good guide for the ARC when considering is assistive technology essential for that student to access the curriculum. So you can use that as a guide. So with all of those special factors, if the ARC determines that any special factor is a yes, you indicated yes on any of those special factors, you're going to include a statement of services and or devices. So this is at the bottom of that section. And if you answer yes to any of the above questions, you're going to include a statement of services and or devices to be provided to address the above special factors. So you can indicate to see specially designed instruction, supplemental aids and services, if there's a behavior intervention plan, or other. And here's a couple of examples of what that other may be. You might be addressing that special factor through measurable annual goals, through program modifications, or support for school personnel. So a couple different options there that you could use to address those needs. Okay, so just for the sake of time, we are not actually going to have you do this so we can be sure we get through goals, because I know that's probably the piece that everybody wants to spend a little more time with. What we were going to have you do is look at your IEP that you brought with you and be sure there's a connection between what's indicated in special factors and what's in your present level of academic achievement and functional performance. So if anything was indicated as a yes on special factors, be sure you've got that constant link throughout the entire IEP. So you should have a statement in present levels that matches up with special factors. So just kind of put that on your to-do list. And when you have a free moment, I know how funny that is, just go back and look at, is there consistency there?
So Carla, before you move on, just one thing to also consider. One area that people have been kind of messing up is that behavior area. So if you do mark it yes, we absolutely need to ensure that there's information in the present level. But also, if you've marked it no, go back to your present level and make sure there's not some information describing the student's inappropriate behavior throughout the present level. So that's another disconnect that we see frequently, is that they've marked it no. And so for every area, if you've got no, go back to your present level too and prove there's no information there that disputes what you've done in the considerations section.
So again, that's just a good way for you to double check yourself and make sure that you do have that connection between the different pieces of the IEP. Okay, so let's get into goals. I know this is the part everybody's been waiting for. So on page 40 is where goals are going to start to be addressed. So you guys know this. We're looking at measurable annual goals, and we're going to look at the different pieces of this. Now, it's not only academic, but also functional goals. So we're looking at needs that result from the student's disability. And Patty hit on that earlier. You really need to be sure that you're checking IEPs and make sure that they're appropriate for that student's needs, because like Patty referenced earlier, for some reason, there have been times where you've got maybe it's a student with a reading disability only, but for whatever reason, someone somewhere along the line threw in a math goal. And so then that just carried on through the years. So be sure that the goals are appropriately aligned with the student's actual disability. And then we're also going to look at other educational needs that may result from the disability. So in looking at measurable annual goals, this is again on page 40. There are a couple of things that I want to point out to you. And I'm not going to ask you to read through all of this, although it is pertinent information. And at some point, you will need to review this. But there are a couple of pieces that I just want to point out to you when we're looking at developing measurable annual goals. Number one, we're looking at goals that are appropriate for the next 12 months. So we're anticipating what this student can achieve with appropriate specially designed instruction within the next calendar year. Now, you certainly are not going to go to IEP jail if your student doesn't meet that goal within the next 12 months, but we do need to make sure that our goals are appropriately ambitious. Here's the next big piece that I wanted to point out. They're designed to meet the needs resulting from the disability, and they're appropriately ambitious. So we talked about that on the previous slide. Each measurable annual goal must have enough detail to allow for objective measurement. And you want to avoid combining multiple skill deficits into one measurable annual goal. Because when we look at the measurement piece, it's impossible to measure a goal that has two skill deficits. So what if they complete one of those skill deficits, but then not the other? How do you measure that? And when you're recording and reporting progress, you can't measure two skill deficits at the same time. So we want to be sure that our measurable annual goals are one skill deficit. And they need to pass the stranger test. So when you have a student that moves from one grade level to the next, maybe they move to another school district, you want to be sure that the receiving teacher is able to implement the SDI to meet that measurable annual goal. I know when I would receive IEPs, there were some of them I would look at and I would say, I don't even know what this goal means. So I'm sure you all have received IEPs that you think, okay, where do I even begin instruction because I don't know what this means. So you just want to be sure that that receiving teacher is immediately able to implement those measurable annual goals, because our students are already have skill deficits, and we certainly don't have time to try to figure out what that actually means. So we want to be sure that they're immediately implementable. Okay, so in looking at what measurable annual goals are, and I just want you to make just a simple T-chart on maybe a scrap piece of paper or somewhere on your guidance document if you have a little room, and using the information that's on the first 4 paragraphs on page 40, or actually 5 paragraphs. Use all of those paragraphs. Just kind of skim through and pick out a few sentences that describe what measurable annual goals are and then what measurable annual goals are not. And we'll spend some time looking at what they are and are not. So just real quickly, just take about 2 minutes and try to jot down just some, you don't even have to write complete sentences, just jot down some notes about what measurable annual goals are and what they are not. Take about 2 minutes. Okay, just for the sake of time, we're going to go ahead and look at what measurable annual goals are and are not. So very briefly, again, anticipated results in 1 year. We want to be appropriately ambitious. We're looking at specific skills to promote access. We're promoting learning of skills. So again, those skill deficits to advance mastery and understanding of content. We want them to be appropriately ambitious, related to the disability. They're linked to present levels. So again, that's why we spend so much time in this training on present levels, because if you don't have a good, strong foundation, the rest of your IEP is not going to be a robust document. We're looking at bridging the gap between where the student is currently functioning and where we want them to be. We're looking at skills and strategies, and measurable annual goals should be able to pass the stranger test. What they are not, we're not copying and pasting standards. Now, you might pull some of the language from the standards, but we're not copying and pasting standards. Measurable annual goals are certainly not the entire curriculum. Students are getting access to the curriculum in those gen ed classes, so we don't need to rewrite the entire curriculum. And we're not combining multiple skill deficits into one measurable annual goal. So one other statement that I want to call your attention to, if you look down at the bottom of page 40, it's the last full sentence in number 2. I want you to highlight that sentence, because this is so important that we remember this for our students with IEPs. ARCs have a dual responsibility to address access to and progress in the general curriculum, and to remediate skills that are below grade level. So I know back several years ago when I was writing IEPs, we were told that you write your goals on grade level. Now, how much sense does that make? If we have a student that's reading on a first grade level, and say they're in 6th grade, and we write measurable annual goals on 6th grade level from 6th grade standards, does that make good sense? Is that, would that be an appropriate practice? Of course not. Now, we do have to make sure they have access to the curriculum, but we also have to work on remediating the skill deficits that are present. So just kind of keep that in mind as we go through. So here are your steps. And again, this is on page 40. It's in a different format. You don't have a graphic, but you've got them written out. So just a different way to look at it. And the good thing about this is your first step is already done. That's where you identify their current educational performance, so that baseline level. You've already done that because you made sure you have a strong foundation in the present level of academic achievement and functional performance. Your next step is going to be to prioritize the skill areas that will have the greatest impact. So in looking at prioritizing, well, where are my bullets on prioritizing? Okay, that's number 2. You've got 4 bullets there under number 2. And this is when this would be appropriate is when you have a student who has multiple skill deficits. There are going to be some students that you can't possibly write a measurable annual goal for every single area that's deficient. Certainly for our most severely impacted students. So this is where you're going to need to prioritize the skill areas that'll have the greatest impact. And then you're going to write your measurable annual goals to include 6 different components. A, B, C, D, E, F is all you have to remember. And we're going to look at each of those components here on the next couple of slides. So there's your 3 big steps. And again, just for the sake of time, we're not going to have you do this activity, but I do want to walk you through it. Here are the 6 components of the measurable annual goals. And A is audience, and that just means the student's name. So if you flip over to page 41, each of these components is broken down. Of course, in number 3, you've got what each one means. But then if you look below that, you've got some actual examples. And you may be thinking, well, okay, why do we even have to recognize that we need to put the student's name in there? Well, because there have been so many times in reviewing IEPs, and I'm sure you've seen this yourself. It's an IEP for Mary, but the goal states Joseph will blah, blah, blah. So what does that indicate? Likely that there's some copying and pasting going on. So just be sure that you do have the correct student's name when you're developing IEP goals. Okay, so behavior is B, and that just means what you want the student to do. It has to be observable, and I want you to commit these 4 things to memory. For a behavior to be observable, it has to either be able to be seen, heard, counted, or timed. So when you're developing goals, be sure that whatever the behavior is that you want the student to do has to be able to be seen, heard, counted, or timed. Then we're going to look at circumstance, and that's just the instructional materials that you're going to use, or circumstances that you're going to use to teach and assess and measure that stated behavior. We're going to look at examples of each of these. So I know we're going through them fast, but just know we're going to look at some examples. The D is degree or criterion, and that's the expected rate of growth within 12 months. So we already talked about how these are anticipated results within 12 months. So that's the expected rate of growth. Evaluation is how we're going to actually measure the student progress toward reaching that goal. And then frequency, obviously, is how frequently you're going to collect data on this particular goal. So let's take a look at what some of these may look like. So using Lucas's IEP, look at the measurable annual goals and your present level statements. And you've already done this part. Identify the baseline data in the present level. So for that area where you identified the baseline data, I want you to determine if each measurable goal contains items A through F. So take a look at his goals and just real briefly see if you can pick out A through F in each of those goals, and then we're gonna take a look at them here. So just real quick, look through, see if you can pick out the components, and then we'll go through them together. Please know, as you go through these goals, these are not perfect goals. Okay, so let's look at measurable annual goal number 1. It's given a controlled text reading passage at his instructional level. Lucas will read aloud a 50-word passage with 2 miscues or less of 4 reading assessments as measured by weekly running record. So let's look and see if all components are there. So for A, we've got Lucas, there's our audience. The behavior, so this is what we want to be able to see, hear, count, or time. He will read aloud a 50-word passage, so that's observable, he'll read aloud. What instructional materials or circumstances are we going to use? Given a controlled text reading passage at his instructional level. To what degree? With 2 miscues or less on 3 out of 4 reading assessments. How are we going to evaluate it? By running record, and how frequently? We'll do that weekly. So all 6 components are present on this goal. Now, again, that doesn't mean it's a great goal, but all of those components are present. So now let's take a look at his present level. So this is just a reminder. This is what you pointed out earlier as baseline data. So just to remind you. So now what we have to figure out is, does this baseline data support the goal? So let's look at the different pieces. Again, it was given a controlled text reading passage at his instructional level. So we had, he identifies multi-syllable words at 75%, identifies high-frequency sight words, so Dolch words at 65%. Lucas responds to literal questions at 70%, inferential questions at 45%. He answers basic factual questions at 60%, answers questions requiring deeper meaning, 35%, reads 83 words correct per minute with 8 miscues. So, Tamara, if you will unmute, and let's just have a conversation about, we've got some good baseline data here. Does it support this goal? So what do you guys think?
I see one shaking their head no.
Okay, so why not?
Why not?
He can already read 83 words.
He can already read 83 words, she said.
Right, okay. So the point of this is, we've got great baseline data. We've got all the components for a measurable annual goal. But remember, there has to be a connection between information and present levels and your goals. So the baseline data doesn't match up with this goal. So that's just to show you that just because all the components are there, that doesn't make it a good goal. So we just need to be sure that we're remembering there has to be that linkage and there has to be consistency between present levels and goals. So in this particular goal, we want him to read aloud a 50-word passage with two miscues or less. So there's nothing in the baseline data that tells us anything about how he's doing with a 50-word passage. We know he can read 83 words correct per minute, but we don't know, was that a 50-word passage? We don't know. So there's inconsistencies there, and we just want to make sure, again, for compliance, all the pieces are there, but we're looking at improving outcomes for students, and these are not in alignment. So let's see. Let's look at one more example. And this is a math goal, and you haven't looked at present level for math yet. So let's go through, and I want to give you about 30 seconds and see if the components are here. Okay, so let's see if our components are all there. Lucas is our audience. We'll solve problems. That's the observable behavior. Given a set of 10 2-digit by 1-digit multiplication problems. How well do we want him to do it? 90% accuracy over 3 consecutive sessions. How are we going to evaluate? We're going to use a teacher-made test. And what's our frequency of data collection? We're going to do that weekly. So all 6 components are present. Now let's take a look at the present level for math. And I know you haven't looked at this yet, so we're going to walk through what his baseline is so he can fluently add and subtract within 1,000 using strategies and algorithms based on place value to 90%. He can multiply one-digit whole numbers by multiples of 10 in the range from 10 to 50. So, is there any issue that you see so far with that first section? Lucas can fluently add and subtract within 1,000 using strategies and algorithms based on place value. So the issue here is he can fluently add and subtract, and although there's no, oh wait, I'm looking at the wrong one. The second sentence, actually, he can multiply one-digit whole numbers by multiples of 10 in the range of 10 to 50. So there's no percent there or this many times out of this many times. I'm not saying that's wrong, but it just kind of leaves that up to interpretation a little bit. And what that means to me is that he can do that at 100% accuracy. So you may or may not want to take that into consideration, whatever works for you. I mean, it's okay to do it like this, but we probably just want to let people know how well does he do that skill. This kind of infers that it's at 100%. Lucas can recognize equivalency 60% of the time. He can generate simple equivalent fractions 40% of the time. So we have to decide, does the baseline data support the goal? So again, let me pull out the pieces. So there's your baseline. Do they match up? So Tamara, if they can talk quickly and determine whether we've got a match here or not. Is there consistency between present levels and the measurable annual goal?
What do y'all think?
Well, if he can do it at 100%, then that's a goal that's already met.
If
It's
he can-
already a two-digit goal, and if you can do it, saying like 50 times 9.
Oh,
or
it's
40
just
times
multiples
5.
of 10, so it maybe needs to be more specific of like, not multiples of 10.
Can you hear Jesse? Maybe it needs to be.
Yes, and that's exactly right. So we know he's doing whole numbers by multiples of 10 in the range of 10 to 50, but that's not in alignment with two-digit by one-digit multiplication problems. So there really is not any consistency between the baseline data and the measurable annual goal. Again, this is great baseline data, and as far as compliance goes, all of our pieces are here for the measurable annual goal, but they're not in alignment. So again, when you have a free moment, and this is kind of a check for you, be sure that you look at your measurable annual goals, compare those to your present levels, and be sure you have alignment there. Be sure you're not talking about different skills when you look at the two. So you do need to have that linkage and that consistency. Okay, any questions on goals before we move into methods of measurement? Everybody feel pretty good about goals?
I wrote a question in the chat box.
Okay.
It goes back though to writing present levels and goals in general intelligence.
Okay, so the question is, let's see, what are skills for general intelligence? Is there a list of age-appropriate skills for general intelligence levels? Okay, so as far as the skills for general intelligence, my recommendation would be to use those present level guiding questions. And if you look back at those, and I want to, as long as I'm interpreting the question correctly, when you look at, because general intelligence is a difficult piece to do. So they're broken down. There's some preschool specific questions, And then you've got environmental questions, attention and memory, application of knowledge and information. And then, of course, you're going to look at the behavior aspects. So as far as skills go, I would say this would be a good place to start with looking at skills. And then I'm not really sure is there a list of age-appropriate skills for general?
And for preschool, they could be using things off of the Battelle or whatever assessment that you get cognitive skills from. That's something you can use for preschool. It's a little bit more difficult, but again, it goes back to working with your school psych on looking at things like processing speed, recall, what are types of cognitive skills.
Okay. So what? Well, I think so, but basically what we would get on, I don't know, Jessie was the one that asked and she actually stepped out and I didn't know it because she's behind me, but basically what we would get off of our psych reports. So that we would call those cognitive skills.
Maybe.
I mean, I don't know if that's, I'm thinking that may not even be the right word, but I think the confusion might have been because we have to have skill specific, be skill specific in the present levels.
So Tamara, I'm going to send you a link that you could share with your teachers as well too. So another cooperative did a self-paced learning module. It's on present levels and general intelligence. And so that's something you can watch, and he explains what kind of information that you can use and to pull into your present level for general intelligence. So if somebody wants to dive deeper on that and become your resident expert, and it sounds like Jessie does, that would be a great module. And when you log in, it'll ask for your school name and just click on non-JPCS area, because that's a non-Jefferson County public school, because that's who developed the module, and you can access the module.
Is it in the dose support site?
I don't know if I've added that one yet, but I think so. Okay. I think I have, but yes, it should be there.
I may have seen that, but okay. Yes, if you'll send me the link, I'll get that out. That'll be awesome.
And then also just be sure, because you mentioned that integrated assessment report, just be sure that it's current information, and remember current is within a year. So, especially for students who haven't had an evaluation in 3 years, or maybe there was just a reevaluation review, be sure that it is current information and current data.
But we're still going to need to address that the second and third year of that evaluation.
Right.
So we will need something else.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, so we're going to go on and we're just going to very, very briefly look at methods of measurement. And the reason we're going to be so brief about this is because there is a progress monitoring training in and of itself. And so we cover all of that and more within that training. So we're just going to kind of fly through this. But you've got your 4 methods of measurement, and these are your broad categories of methods of measurement, how you're going to measure progress toward each of those measurable annual goals. So you've got curriculum-based measurements, direct measures, indirect measures, and authentic assessments. And this is on page 44 in your guidance document, and I encourage you to look at the specific methods that you can use to measure measurable annual goals. Again, these are the broad categories, but be sure you're looking at those specific measurement tools. So in Infinite Campus, when you develop your measurable annual goals, you'll notice on this particular slide, you've got to list a method of measurement. That's that broad category. So this is where you're either going to list authentic assessment, curriculum-based measure, direct or indirect. But then within your goal, that's where you're going to put that specific measurement tool that's going to be used to measure that measurable annual goal. So be sure you put the specific tool within the goal. Okay, so I'm not going to hit on this information. This is all in your guidance document, and you all are very capable of reading through this. So there's some examples of curriculum-based measurements. And then direct measurements, just know with this one, when you are using a direct measure, the student must be present. So the student has to be present for you to observe and measure that particular skill that's within the goal. So here are your examples of direct measures. And the one we see the most typically is frequency count. So you're basically making a tally. Do they do this skill or do they not? Not saying that's the one you need to use, but that's the one that's typically used. So just remember that for a direct measure, the student has to be present for you to observe that behavior. And then there's indirect measures. And this is where you're using a scoring criteria without a direct observation of the student. So this could be done, for instance, with a rubric where you're looking at student work after it's completed. So that's just an example of an indirect measure. And then authentic assessments. These have to be paired with another method of measurement, but here's some specific examples. So we don't typically see a lot of authentic assessments being used simply because they are kind of difficult to use. Now, certainly if it's appropriate for that measurable annual goal, here are some examples that you might want to consider using to measure progress toward a student's measurable annual goal. Now, this is an Appendix C in your guidance document, just a kind of color-coded way to look at the various components of measurable annual goals. And then also an Appendix C of your document is just another example of the way to kind of break down and look at each of those different components. So feel free to refer back to those whenever needed. Okay, so we're going to look at a couple of goals, 3 or 4 probably, and we're going to try to figure out, are all the components there, and is it a great goal? So look at this goal real quick and try to pick out, just in your mind, you can jot them down if you want to, A, B, C, D, E, F, and just try to figure out, are all components there? Okay. And I know we're not giving you a lot of time for these, and I apologize, but I do want to get through because I think it's really helpful to see some examples and non-examples. Okay, so does it have all the components? So let's look. So your audience is Mickey. Will fluently read. Given a reading passage, there's your circumstance. 125 words per minute. Data tracking is how we're going to measure it. And we're going to do it bi-weekly. So would you all be in agreement that all 6 components are present? You'll just give me a thumbs up or a thumbs down that you agree they're all there. Okay, everybody's saying yes. Does anybody have any objections to any of these components? Do you feel like any of them aren't great or could be improved?
Miss Amy said maybe given a reading passage within his what?
Independent reading level should be more
Independent reading level might be more specific.
Okay. Any other objections? So let's look at a couple of things. Reading passage, yes. What does that mean? What kind of reading passage? Data tracking. So let me call you back to look at your specific measurement tools on page 44 and 45. I don't see data tracking listed anywhere there. So what does that look like? What is data tracking? Okay. Bi-weekly, what issue might you have with using bi-weekly? Anybody have issue with that? So go ahead.
We're not really doing it bi-weekly.
Okay. So my issue with bi-weekly is that means different things to different people. So bi-weekly could mean twice a week or every other week. So how do you know which one it is? Now, I will tell you that in the guidance document, bi-weekly is listed as a frequency. My recommendation is just don't use it. If you want a skill measured twice a week, say twice a week, or say every other week. To me, in my opinion, bi-weekly doesn't pass the stranger test because it means different things to different people. And both are correct, but it needs to pass the stranger test.
And Carla, speaking of stranger test, and you may get that here, but where it says on his independent reading level, I don't know what that is.
Right.
If I'm the receiving teacher, I don't know what his independent reading level is.
So here's the way we kind of modified that goal to be more appropriate. So where Patty just said his independent reading level, we said given a third grade reading passage, he will fluently read the passage at 125 words per minute over 4 consecutive trials as measured by weekly oral reading fluency probe. So oral reading fluency probe is a specific tool that's listed under your curriculum-based measures. So rather than saying data tracking, we're going to use an oral reading fluency probe. Okay. All right, let's look at one more. Given a classroom situation, Pluto will display appropriate interactions with staff with 85% accuracy for 6 consecutive weeks as measured by daily behavior data and teacher observations. So let's look at our first question. Are all components present? So we've got our audience, we've got our behavior. He will display in a classroom situation, 85% accuracy. We're going to use behavior data, and we're going to do it daily. So just kind of talk amongst yourselves and let me know, what issues do you have with these components, if any?
I'm sorry, I didn't mute, but they were saying, well, what kind of situation and appropriate interactions?
Right. So what is an appropriate interaction? And display, that's going to be problematic. So how is he going to display it? We need to be more specific. How do we want him to, how can you observe display? Well, we don't know because display would look different to different people. So a classroom situation, is that all classroom situations? We don't know. 85% accuracy. So I think we get in a rut with using percentages. And just keep in mind, percentages are not the only way that you can monitor a behavior or any other type of goal. Percentages work for a lot of skills, but it's difficult for behavior. So we'll look at how we might modify this to be a little easier to monitor. So 85% accuracy might not be the best way to try to evaluate. Again, with behavior data, that's not a specific measurement tool. So we want to be sure we're using specific tools. And daily. Now, certain goals, it may be appropriate for daily, but that kind of seems like overkill to me. So to have to monitor, and especially if you look at classroom situation every day, So that kind of makes it seem like, again, it doesn't pass the stranger test, but it kind of makes it seem like we're monitoring every class all day long, every day. So we just need to be more specific. So how we modified this goal, we said given a redirection by staff. So instead of in a classroom situation, we said when there's redirection by staff, he will respond using eye contact, clean language, and respectful tone. Now, those are all things can be observed. We can observe, did he use eye contact? Was there clean language? With a score of 9 on a 12-point rubric. So that's very different from using 85% accuracy. We know we've got a rubric. We're looking for 9 out of 12 points, and it's either yes or no. Did he meet that? Over 5 consecutive trials as measured weekly. So we are looking at, instead of daily, it would be more appropriate to look at this goal weekly. And then you'll notice we have C attached rubric. So just keep in mind when the ARC develops these goals, and we all know who's developing these goals, the draft goals, you need to go to that ARC meeting with the measurement tool with you. Now, that may have to be adjusted as the ARC reviews that draft IEP and those draft measurable annual goals, but you do need to have the monitoring tool already developed and ready to go, whether it's going to be a student that you continue to serve or whether they're being promoted to a different grade and they're going to be going to a different teacher, different school, whatever. You do need to have those monitoring tools already developed. Okay, so benchmarks and short-term objectives, we are just, again, going to kind of fly through. We've got about 15 minutes left. So when you use benchmarks, those are increments of learning to demonstrate progress toward the measurable annual goal, where short-term objectives are those intermediate steps. Now, if you use short-term objectives, you do have to have all 6 components, just like in the measurable annual goals. So, Tamara, does your district require benchmarks or short-term objectives?
Well, no, not that we require, but I talk to them sometimes about their situations where these are good and necessary.
Okay.
So we try to make it case by case.
Okay. And the reason that I ask is, as you know, the regs require measurable annual goals. So that's the big piece. And then, of course, some districts, like we mentioned in the very beginning, be sure you're familiar with your district policies and procedures, because some districts do actually require benchmarks or short-term objectives. So for short-term objectives, here are the big pieces. Again, subcomponents, looking at discrete skills. There's a gradual increase in level of mastery and then gradual decrease in support. So I really prefer short-term objectives, and I believe Patty does as well. And the reason we prefer those is that when it comes time for progress monitoring and you're reporting progress, it's a lot easier to show progress on short-term objectives than it is if you're using either benchmarks or whether you're monitoring the annual goal, because we are looking at subcomponents of the whole. And so it's easier to show progress towards short-term objectives in our opinion. So you guys know what you do in your district. So post-secondary transition is a training in and of itself, so we're not going to spend any time on that. And those of you who have students of that age, you are well aware of what's required for post-secondary transition. If you need assistance with that, please reach out to us and we can certainly assist you with that. With reporting progress, again, there's a whole training on this. So you do want to be sure that you include when reports on progress will be made toward parents. And then typically it's done concurrently with the issuance of report cards. If not, just be sure you indicate when that will be reported to parents. And there's what that little box looks like on Infinite Campus. Okay, specially designed instruction. I don't know if you guys are familiar, but there is a document titled IEP and Lesson Plan Development Handbook. I'll show you what that looks like here in just a moment. A lot of times we just refer to it as the schoolhouse document. It's got that red and yellow schoolhouse on the front of it. So if you're not familiar with that, you might want to pull that into your IEP documents when you start developing your draft IEPs. But SDI is, simply put, it's what the teacher does. The teacher is going to use SDI to instruct, assess, reteach, adapt to the unique needs, and ensure access to the general curriculum for our students with IEPs. So SDI is what the teacher does. It is planned, designed, and delivered by a certified special ed teacher or speech language pathologist. Here are some examples of specially designed instruction. And you'll see at the bottom it says for additional examples, see the IEP and Lesson Plan Development Handbook. Just a caution here, be sure that your specially designed instruction matches up to your measurable annual goals. And I encourage you to not include a laundry list of SDI for each goal, because as you know, an IEP is a legally binding document. And if you put certain specially designed instruction techniques in for those goals, then you actually have to make sure that they're being implemented. So use the ones that are appropriate based on that particular measurable annual goal. So supplementary aids and services differs from SDI, where SDI is what the teacher does, SAS is what the student needs. And we're looking at what the student needs to access the general curriculum. So SAS are needed for students to advance and make appropriate progress on measurable annual goals, to be involved and make progress in the general curriculum. SAS can allow students to participate in extracurricular and other non-academic areas, and be educated and participate with other students with and without disabilities. So that is on page 52 in your guidance document. And again, you certainly don't want to just put in a laundry list of things that you think, oh yeah, they could use that. You want it to be appropriate based on the student's needs and the student's goals. So here's some examples of SAS. And then this is the document that I referenced that's known as the schoolhouse document. And if you don't have that, we can certainly send that to you. But if you look, here's in that document, they have compared SDI to SAS, and it's broken down into discrete areas. So you have, for math, you have certain practices that would be SDI, and then supplemental aids and services. You've got that for every area, for reading comprehension, for reading fluency, for math. So do take some time and familiarize yourself with that. And again, there's no need to put all of this in there. You just need to choose the ones that are appropriate for that student based on their needs and based on their measurable annual goals. Okay, for accommodations, these are supported by student performance data and the IEP. So again, we've got that consistent linkage between present levels, measurable annual goals, SDI, and SAS. Accommodations need to be used consistently as part of routine instruction. So accommodations are not something that we're just going to put in place for end of year assessments. These are things that we're doing consistently throughout the entire school year that are part of routine instruction. This is what it looks like on your IEP. And of course, you're gonna indicate based on data which of these accommodations are required for each student. Alternate assessment, we are not going to spend time on, because that, if you guys are working with students that qualify for alternate assessment, you are very familiar with Sherida, and she has given you tons of information on alternate assessment. So we're not going to spend time on that here. Program modifications and support for school personnel. These are provided on behalf of the student so that they can advance appropriately in that general curriculum, also in extracurricular activities, and be able to participate with non-disabled peers. So accommodations and SAS are not program modifications. These are things that are provided for school personnel to be able to make sure the student can do the things listed here. Okay, LRE, and we've got about 10 minutes, so I'm gonna have to zip through this. So this is where we're looking at, to the maximum extent appropriate, children with disabilities are educated with non-disabled peers. So we're always gonna consider that gen ed environment first. You often hear we have to offer a continuum of placements. So here's that continuum. And like I just mentioned, always want to make sure that we're considering instruction in the gen ed setting first. So then if the ARC determines that a student cannot be successful with appropriate supplemental aids and services and SDI in the gen ed setting, then we look at our more restrictive options. So you'll see as we go down, our options do get more restrictive. So we always want to make sure that we're looking at the least restrictive environment first. Okay, so in documenting LRE, the requirement is that you're documenting anytime they are not with non-disabled peers. So there are a couple of different ways you can do that. The first one, you could use kind of a narrative. This one says Sarah will not participate in general ed for language arts. She will receive language arts instruction in the resource room. So that would be all that's required because she just is receiving language arts, specially designed instruction that's not in that gen ed setting. So you don't necessarily have to tell every placement for every subject area. It's where they're not in that gen ed setting. Now, you might document it this way. She will receive special education for language and then be in general education for all other areas. So it's basically personal preference. Maybe your district has a kind of an unwritten rule about how you document that. But the point is, if this student, again, goes to another teacher or another district or another state, they need to be sure to know where that student needs to be placed in which classes, where their bottom needs to be in a class. So special ed services, and this was one of the pre-test questions, if you remember that. So special ed services just means the SDI services that are identified through the development of the IEP. So what that looks like is, that's the grid where you're going to say the projected date of services and beginning of services, anticipated frequency, and we'll look at what that looks like. So this is what it looks like in the IEP. And so this is when students are going to be receiving that SDI that we've listed under each measurable annual goal. In looking at this, just be sure that you've got all of these areas completed, because again, we need for it to pass the stranger test, and we need to know exactly where that student is going to be served. And for location, this must match up with your LRE section. So it makes it really difficult when you receive an IEP of an incoming student and the LRE section says one thing, but then the location under special ed services says something contradictory. So just be sure those two areas do match up and they're in alignment.
Well, let me make 2 points before you move on. So we have preschool teachers in the room. So the setting would be, if they're staying in the preschool classroom, the setting is going to be the general education classroom. What you're going to put, though, for the number of minutes is only the amount of time that you're going to be spending doing SDI toward those measurable annual goals. And so the same point goes along with co-teaching. So when you're doing the general education setting, and you may say co-teaching in language arts, you're not putting the whole block of time unless you're doing specially designed instruction for that whole block of time the student's in there. So you're going to look at your measurable annual goals, and the amount of time is in relationship to what you're going to do to be providing specially designed instruction in that setting for those particular measurable annual goals.
And that's a good point, Patty. Thank you for saying that. And there are examples of this. The way to document the LRE on page 59 in your guidance document, you've got several different scenarios there and how you would document those on the LRE section, and then also on the special ed services section. And you do need to delineate if your student is in co-teaching for math or co-teaching for reading. You need to be specific about that and be very explicit about what services they are to be receiving. So thank you, Patty, for pointing that out. And you'll also notice on the ones that have co-teaching, it's 20 minutes. It is not the entire block of time. Now, that's not to say that you have to use 20 minutes, but again, it's the amount of time that they're actually receiving specially designed instruction. And then related services, so those are transportation, developmental, supportive, or corrective services, which are needed by our students. Here are, this is, again, same documentation process for documenting related services. And then here are your examples for related services. So I'll give you just a minute to look through those. Okay. And that actually completes. So we've got about 3 minutes left. So I want you just for about 1 minute, just think about what needs to be the next step for you. So do you need to work on that strong foundation for present levels? Do you really need to be cognizant of having that connection between all components of your IEP process? So just start thinking and maybe jot down a goal for yourself. What do you want to do after this training? What's one thing you want to change or one thing you want to improve? And that's just kind of a personal goal for you. Okay, and then I do want to point you back to the training outline. We put several additional resources on there. There are other online training modules. I know Patty mentioned the one that she's going to send to Tamara so she can share that out as needed. But there are some really good additional resources put on there. I put some of the documents, the Kentucky Administrative Regulations. The schoolhouse document is linked on there. You've got your AT checklist that's linked on there. And then, like I said, other training modules. So be sure you keep that handy. And then we do need you to take the end of training quiz. And there are a couple of reasons why we need you to take that. Number one, we did not have you sign in. Now, Tamara, you may have had them sign in first thing this morning. But for our records, this is both your sign in and the way that you get your certificate of attendance. So if you pass the quiz with 80% accuracy, you will be sent an email, and be sure you check your junk or clutter files if you don't see it come through directly on your email. It should come through within just a couple of minutes after completion. If you don't score an 80%, you can retake the assessment as many times as you need to. I don't think you will. But the other reason this helps us inform our training in that we do compare these to the pretest, and we see where maybe we need to spend a little more time or go a little more in depth with certain areas of the training. So if you will please take just about a minute and complete this, and then we will be done and we can actually take any questions that you guys may have.
If their codes are not, if their code is not scanning for some of them, can they do that after we get done, take the quiz? Or were you wanting us to do it all together?
No, you don't have to do it all together. Is it not? Let me see.
Okay, they're good. They're getting it.
Okay. Yeah, it worked for me, so it should be.
I guess you have to get pretty close to the screen.
You probably do, yeah.
When can we get while they're doing that, when can we get the progress monitoring? We need to do that probably too, I think. I just had to get this one done fast because of the cap.
We'll look at our calendars and shoot you some date, Tamara.
I'll try to remember to come up with learning
Y'all start
requests.
with students
We start back, our kids come on the 9th.
of September, okay. We'll look at your calendar. Another point I don't think we made, and while they're wrapping up, is make sure that your staff understand they're not writing an IEP based on COVID situations. You write your IEP always as if you're in brick and mortar setting. So that never changes.
I went over that at our PLC on Monday.
Perfect.
Mm-hmm.
So Tamara, when everyone has scanned the code and
They've scanned it, they're taking the quiz, I think.
okay, we're good for you to sign off, and my group's going to stay on for just a few minutes, and so we'll just check some dates and look at your calendar, see when your staff might be available, because once they start with students, that's going to be harder to do, right?
I can usually get them out, once a month in an afternoon or something like that.
Perfect. All right.
Thank y'all so much.
Thank you.
Happy birthday, Patty.
Thank you. Bye,
Bye,
Tamara.
Tamara. Thanks for having us today.
No, I could not hear him. What was he doing?
Oh, I just heard him a few times. I wondered if you could.
Oh, no.
Okay, good.
So Tammy and Kayla, we want to see y'all's pretty faces. They're really not there. Look, Tammy's not getting on there. She was not really on there.
She's out running errands and making it look like she's on here.
So Kayla, just one thing you'll know, this is typically a 6-hour training, and we tried to cram it in. It really, Carla texted me halfway through and said, because I knew that we were running really behind, that we need to make it really more 4-hour if we're going to keep doing it this way. But because I've done that to Carla several times, we do think the most important piece is the present level, but that takes so long that then she's running through everything else. Did we even have transit? Because I wasn't looking either. Did we have transition in ESY? Did we in there, or did we hide those?
Well, they're just a slide on transition, and I just said, that's a training in and of itself, and we're not going to spend time on it today. But then, no, I guess we hid the ESY slides last time.
I was waiting for that to come up, and it was gone. So I
don't know why we completely hid that.
Well, and I don't want to do progress monitoring.
I don't either. Oh.
No, because we've not made that yet an online.
I know.
And I don't know how we're going to do it. Anyway.
Yeah, we probably need to schedule some time to look at that.
It's so painful. So did you learn anything, Kayla?
Yeah, that's a lot of information. But when y'all were going through it, because you have to be so specific with each part, because there's so many different levels of people that write IEPs anyways. So you can't just fly through it. You have to be specific. So I liked how y'all did that. Just broke it down. And I like the activities, like how they had an IEP and went through it with you. So
it's much better to do that based. This has worked okay, but the face where and having more time to actually spend with those highlighting activities. But this is okay. It is what it is, and we're working in that world. But so okay. Well,
I guess Tammy really did leave, didn't she?
She's lying like a dog. She's not even there.
She said, "Heck with that. I don't need no IEP training."
Yeah. I'm gonna get on to her about that. How dare you? Well, you're gonna laugh, Carla. So today we're having our house appraised. And so when you were presenting, Jim had gone to get him something at Sonic or whatever. And so I got up and I was mopping the floors.
Serious?
I really did. So I was thinking about your gal who hung the banner and all that stuff during the middle of it. I kept listening in case I needed to rush in here and if you referred back to me or whatever. I didn't stray too far, but it was enough where I was actually mopping floors.
That's so funny. I know when we trained Tillman on trauma, Ben was on there. And so he asked me that weekend, he was like, so when David's talking and you've muted your microphone and turned your camera off, what are you doing? I said, I'm sitting at my desk waiting on my next turn. And he's like, oh, I'd be up doing laundry or something if I were you. And I'm like, seriously? So I was like, no, I'm sitting there waiting on my next turn.
I usually sit here and wait on the next turn, but I was just like, I'm going to take this opportunity and get up for a moment.
Yeah, maybe I need to have my house appraised. Maybe that would make me mop the floor.
I never mop the floors. These floors do not mop well, so you still see smear marks. They're laminate, wood-looking floors.
Yeah.
They're just never, and they're a darker color, but they always show, even when you try to mop them, it shows a smear on them.
Yeah, well, James did yesterday. He swept the entire house and then vacuumed the rugs and everything. So I was like,
what was up with him?
I worked on the kitchen. I was like, we got to do something with this house. This is ridiculous.
Oh, that's right, because you don't.
I've stood it as long as I can. We got to do something.
Mm-hmm. So. All right, gals. Y'all go eat lunch, and I will see you whenever. And we're just going to leave Tammy. We should leave this up and leave it hanging. All of us be gone.
We should.
She's got to end the meeting, so.
Where the heck did she go?
No, we're going to give her a hard way to go. What a bad example she is.
We need to ask her, what was your favorite part toward the end of the training?
What was the code word that you put in?
Yeah, what's the code word? Oh, that's funny. All right, y'all have a good rest of the day.
Bye. See ya.
One other thing, I did get a list from Karen Bush that she had collected, which what she had put as the district contact. Carla, she's got James. Of course, James, they do PBIS in Trig. I'm not sure really every district is set up with a good PBIS structure, but I think she's got a name identified for each district. I'm going to send you that link. And then we need to be thinking about a correspondence about what we could send out to say what we might want to set up, just an opportunity for networking. I don't know, or maybe we just need to survey what their needs are. So I'm just going to give you the list, and let's be thinking about this, how we're going to approach it. I don't know who they had down for Mayfield. You'll see on the list, but I thought it was interesting they had somebody identified. She had somebody identified for everything.
Yeah. I just feel like everyone is like at a completely different level. So it's going to be crazy. Yeah. Like even schools within the district are at different levels. Yep. So it's going to be wild.
And some of them think they're really doing good jobs.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and the problem is, I know Lisa Lowe worked a lot with James and with I think it was the middle and or high. And so I asked James I was like, are they really doing PBIS? And he's like, well, they say they are. But, they get like a gold star or whatever the rating is because it's a self-assessment.
Right.
So, Kayla, I can't wait till you work with Trig and see if they really are gold star.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting. So,
yeah.
Because some will get the gold star and then they'll just be like, oh, we did it. We're done.
Yeah.
And just slack off on everything.
Yeah. It's interesting. Okay. Well, anyway, I'll forward that to you and then we'll have some conversation about where to move next with it.
Hey, so Gretchen emailed us earlier. And Kayla, have you sent her anything?
No, I haven't.
I haven't either because I don't know. I mean, let me find the email. Well, where is it? I can't find it for whatever reason. Anyway, I cannot find that email. It's so weird. She sent something saying she's going to be working on the agenda this afternoon. What did we want her to put on it? Well, I don't know.
What does she? That's what I talked to Carl about this yesterday and said, I mean, what does the agenda say?
Well, she had something on that one email that she said that she sent out with the Zoom invite.
Yeah. Something about y'all were resident experts or something, wasn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, no, that's on the website. I looked on the web page to see the PD opportunities, and y'all are listed under the PD opportunity for the guidance counselor as our own Carla Bengals and Kayla Jones. Da, 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 da. I don't know what you're doing.
Kayla, are you going in person?
Yeah,
Okay.
I was gonna go. Are you?
I'll be virtual.
You're okay.
Yeah, with that many people, if there's gonna be that many people there, yeah.
So what's she asking you, Carla?
About what?
What did Gretchen send in the email she wants you to do? Put some.
For some reason, let me get on my computer. I was just looking at it on my phone. Hold up here. It was, she sent it to Kayla, Damien, me, and Sarah.
Mhm.
And I'm sure Sarah's like, well, I don't know. Y'all are the ones that asked me.
And I think what I told you yesterday was you could just do a brief overview of the work that y'all have been involved with trauma-informed care and youth mental health first aid.
Right.
And
Here it is. Good morning, all. It's Damien, me, Sarah. I guess Kayla, she didn't put you on there. I'm excited to share that we have over 50 participants registered for our WKEC Counselor Network tomorrow. I'm crafting the agenda and will send to them this afternoon. Please let me know what you would like for me to add to the agenda.
So Carla, why don't you put, and just reply back and copy Kayla on that too, but just put Carla and Kayla, brief report on work, I don't know, from the special ed department regarding trauma-informed care, social emotional learning activities, and then and probably, how do we need to word this? The beginning of a PBIS or the beginning of PBIS work. And see, then Kayla could include that as, we're looking at starting a network and getting out to support districts with this work that is going to be new for us. So it's going to take us a little bit to get there.
Okay.
So just, and I wouldn't spend a lot of time. I would just give them a brief update like you've been doing the trauma-informed care, and you could talk about what y'all been doing with the zones of regulation work, and how, you've done face-to-face training and we'll be glad to continue to do face-to-face trainings, and you've got some online modules with that you're working on. And then you could share your online module that you've done with the virtual PBIS activities too. So I wouldn't feel like you've got to do a lot. So yeah, if it was me, I would want to know how much time each person's taking, because is it a 3-hour meeting?
I think it's 2, I'm thinking.
Really? And if she's having Damien, he needs to be really the big.
Yeah, and I kind of feel like he will, because he's a wealth of knowledge. So I kind of feel like he'll probably talk for the most part, but I don't know. I'm surprised she said only 50 people had registered.
Well, and they may not all come face to face too. Let me see what the last one was. She probably.
I think you registered for either virtual or in person.
Yeah, but I'm just saying that may not have be 50 people that show up there at the conference center.
Yeah.
In face to face, or like I like to say, mask to mask.
Mask to mask.
Yeah, I know. She's got 56 have registered. That's a lot.
Yeah.
But like for the elementary principal one that's next week, she only has 12. But again, they're in the middle of starting schools.
Yeah.
I know Mayfield Elementary, they're going virtual, so I don't imagine many will be there in person.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's one thing I think more people will take advantage of, just remoting in, because you save on travel time too. So I don't know. Okay, girlies, y'all have fun with it. What time is that tomorrow? I have another meeting tomorrow.
9 o'clock. Is it 9?
Oh,
I think so.
Well, maybe
I think it's 9 to 11.
I may Skype into that. Y'all may have to send me the link.
Okay. All right.
All right. See y'all sometime.
All
All right, bye.
Bye.